The hotel owner posed as a guest that night to uncover who was silently stealing from him. The housekeeper on the 8th floor answered a call, her voice cracking, and in less than a minute, the man with his arms crossed understood she wasn't the thief. The 8th floor corridor of the Emerald Grand Hotel smelled of expensive perfume and purchased silence. The soft glow of the gilded wall sconces fell upon the plush carpet in a way that permitted no shadows. It was almost midnight, and the city outside was already asleep. But inside, beneath that gentle golden light, two people who had never truly crossed paths were about to collide in the only way that changes the course of things. Liam O'Connell, the absolute owner of the O'Connell Hotel Group, had been leaning against the far wall of the corridor for over an hour, dressed unostentatiously, no watch visible, nothing to give him away. Anyone passing by would mistake him for an insomniac guest who had stepped out to stretch his legs. And that was exactly what he wanted. He had been planning this night for weeks. He had checked into the hotel under a false name, staying in a suite on the 7th floor, directly below the executive floor. He had dined alone in the restaurant, ordered room service. He had silently observed every face that crossed his line of sight, without those faces knowing they were being evaluated by the man whose surname was engraved in bronze at the building's entrance. He had a reason, an old, painful reason that had shaped him into who he was now. A man who trusted no one on his own team. Years ago, his own brother and business partner had emptied a significant part of the family fortune before disappearing from the country. Liam had learned a lesson that day that had never left him. The thief always lives inside the house. And that night, after months of small inconsistencies in the financial reports of the Emerald Grand Hotel, his flagship property, the jewel of the chain, he had decided to do what no sensible businessman would: personally infiltrate, without notifying anyone, not even Declan Gallagher, his long-serving general manager, the man he had considered his right hand for so many years. The plan was simple: spend 2 nights walking the corridors as an anonymous guest, observe the staff, identify the traitor. What Liam didn't know as he waited, leaning against that wall, was that the true traitor was much closer to him than he could ever have suspected, and that the person he was about to encounter in the corridor, the person he had decided to watch first for a reason he could barely recall, was exactly the only person on that floor who was going to save everything he believed had lost. At the end of the corridor, a service door opened. Siobhan Murphy emerged, pushing a trolley laden with neatly folded towels. A single mother, a housekeeper for years at that hotel, a woman of discreet movements and trained memory, who recalled every detail of every room she cleaned. Her hair was neatly pinned up with a simple clip, her white apron spotless, and her posture straight, like someone who knows that being invisible is part of the job. Liam watched her from his corner, mentally noting the time, the direction of her steps, and the room she stopped in front of. Suite 814. Suite 814 stirred something in him, but he couldn't remember what. Siobhan knocked gently twice. She waited, knocked again, then used her service key and entered. The door remained ajar. From afar, Liam heard the fragile voice of an elderly woman greeting the housekeeper with an affection that was entirely non-protocol. "Mrs. Meyer, I've brought your towels and the medication you requested from reception this afternoon. How have you been today?" "Ah, Siobhan, my dear, come in, love." Liam frowned. "My dear, it wasn't a guest greeting an employee. It was something else, a greeting of belonging." He discreetly pulled his phone from his pocket, accessed the hotel's internal system, to which he had full private access, unknown to his team, and found the record for Suite 814. As he saw it, something inside him turned cold. Mrs. Meyer Walsh, a permanent resident. She had been living in that suite for years, but there was something strange in the report, something he had never read because he had never delved into the details of individual permanent guest accounts. Those were Declan's affairs, but now, suddenly, it shone on his phone screen like a silent alarm. Mrs. Meyer's monthly bill had charges that didn't fit her profile. Spa services she never used, dinners in the restaurant at hours she never descended, expensive bottles of wine consumed in rooms that weren't hers. Liam stared at the screen. That account had been inflated with phantom charges for months. Then, before he could process what he was seeing, he heard something else. Inside the suite, Mrs. Meyer's fragile voice rose a tone, shifting from affectionate greeting to something different, something that sounded like worry. "My dear, I've received another hotel bill again. Do you know what's happening? I haven't left this room in a week, love, but my account has charges for things I didn't order. What should I do, Siobhan? I don't know where else to get money." There was a silence. Then Siobhan's voice responded, low, very low. so low that Liam had to take 2 steps down the corridor to hear her. "Mrs. Meyer, don't worry, I'll find out tonight, I promise you. But please don't sign anything until I speak to you again, and if any staff member knocks on your door at odd hours, don't open it. Do you hear me? Siobhan, my dear, what's happening in this hotel? Mrs. Meyer, I can't tell you yet, but please trust me, as you always have." Liam clenched his phone, blood rushed to his temples. "As you always have." Those words held a weight he couldn't yet decipher. Siobhan exited the suite, carefully closed the door, and for an instant rested her forehead against the wood. Liam, from the end of the corridor, saw the gesture. The housekeeper took a deep breath, then straightened up, picked up her trolley, and began walking towards the service door. But before she reached the lift, her phone rang, a low, almost apologetic chime from her apron pocket. Siobhan quickly pulled it out, looked at the screen, and when she saw who was calling, the woman's entire demeanor changed. Liam noticed it. Her shoulders tensed, her free hand braced against the corridor wall for support, her breathing became shallow. She answered, "Hello. Yes, it's me. Yes." A pause. "What? What did you say?" A longer pause. "But, doctor, that can't be. I paid the prescription 2 days ago. I left the receipt in the chemist's drawer. Siobhan's voice broke, splitting in half like fine glass. Liam, from his corner, remained perfectly still. This woman was hearing something on the other end of the phone that was making her silently crumble in the middle of a 5-star hotel corridor. "Doctor, please, don't suspend Sian's medication tonight. I'll go to the chemist first thing tomorrow. I swear I will, but please don't suspend it." Another longer, denser pause. "How much? How much exactly?" And then Siobhan Murphy, the woman who for years had been invisible on that floor, leaned her back against the corridor wall and slowly slid down until she was sitting on the floor, phone still pressed to her ear, eyes brimming with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Doctor, I promise I'll go tomorrow. Tomorrow without fail. Just don't suspend the medication tonight." She ended the call. She remained sitting on the floor, brought her free hand to her mouth to stifle any sound, and then looked up to see an unknown guest standing at the end of the corridor, watching her with his arms crossed. Siobhan immediately straightened up, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, adjusted her apron. She did everything the manual of the Emerald Grand Hotel had taught her to do. When a guest found her at a moment they shouldn't have seen her, but something in her that night couldn't quite compose itself. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need anything? If you'll allow me, I'll bring you whatever you need in a moment, madam." The man's voice from the end of the corridor was calm, low, without any tone of demand. "I don't need anything. I was just standing here. I apologize for having seen you at this moment. It was not my intention." Siobhan nodded, picked up her trolley, made a gesture to leave, but before she could pass the guest, the man spoke again, this time with a voice that held something different, something that wasn't guest curiosity. Something she, without knowing why, instantly identified as dangerous. "Madam, just one question. Has the lady in suite 814 had problems with her account for a long time?" Siobhan stopped dead and knew, at that exact moment, that the man with his arms crossed at the end of the 8th floor corridor was no ordinary guest, and that the question he had just asked placed her that night before the biggest decision of her adult life. Siobhan stood in the middle of the corridor, her hands clenched on the trolley. The man at the end hadn't moved. He remained with his arms crossed, with that look that wasn't a guest's, waiting for an answer she hadn't yet decided if she would give. A part of Siobhan, the cautious part, the part that for years had learned to survive by staying silent, screamed at her from within to lie, to say she didn't understand the question, to politely withdraw, to go cry in the staff bathroom and start the day again tomorrow, as if nothing had happened. But the other part of Siobhan, the part that had just heard the doctor tell her that Xian's medication was going to be suspended tonight, the part that had just promised Mrs. Meyer she would find out what was happening, the part that had been carrying unspoken questions for months, that part told her something else. It told her that this might be the last opportunity life would give her to speak. She took a deep breath. "Sir, forgive me. Why do you ask about Mrs. Meyer's account?" The man at the end hesitated for barely a fraction of a second. Then he took 2 steps forward, emerged from the dark zone of the gilded sconce, and for the first time, Siobhan could see him in a slightly better light. He wasn't a young guest, nor a nervous man. He was a mature man, with a calm presence, one of those who have commanded for years without needing to raise their voice. And in that instant, looking closely, Siobhan understood something more. She had seen that face before, somewhere, on some hotel document, in some painting in the lobby, in some corporate brochure that had once circulated among the staff. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. "Madam," the man said in a low, firm voice, "my name is Liam O'Connell, and this hotel is mine." Siobhan brought her free hand to her mouth. Her entire body trembled. She brought both hands to her chest, then to her apron, then back to her mouth. For a fraction of a second, she was unable to speak. "Sir, Mr. O'Connell, calm yourself, madam, please. I didn't come to frighten you. I came to understand. Tonight, I am in my own hotel, disguised as a guest, for a very specific reason, and I am going to ask you, with all the respect you deserve after what I have just witnessed, to trust me for the next few minutes. What you decide to tell me or not to tell me will not affect your job. You have my word, and my word in this building is the only thing worth more than my signature." Siobhan tried to respond, but her voice failed her. She nodded. Liam continued speaking with the same calm. "I overheard part of your call with the doctor. I didn't mean to listen, but I heard it. And before you ask me why a man like me cares what happens tonight to an employee of his hotel, I will answer before you ask. Because for years, something hasn't added up in this building. And because the woman inside suite 814, Mrs. Meyer, just appeared on a screen with an account she shouldn't have, an account inflated with charges she never requested. And because when you entered that suite 10 minutes ago, she treated you as if you were family, and that told me something I didn't expect to hear." Siobhan leaned against the wall, her legs barely supporting her. She felt the phone pressed against her palm, as if the doctor's voice was still on the other end. "Mr. O'Connell, Mrs. Meyer is like family to me. I've known her for many years. Before I started working at this hotel, Mrs. Meyer and her late husband knew my mother, rest her soul. When my mother passed away and I was left alone with a newborn child, it was Mrs. Meyer who helped me get this job. I owe that lady the little I have. And for months, sir, something has been happening with her account and with other accounts too, accounts of elderly guests, permanent residents who don't leave their rooms. I've seen things I shouldn't have seen, sir, but I was afraid to speak. Because my son, Qian, depends on medication that costs an entire month's wage. And if I lose this job, my son loses his treatment." Liam listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took a deep breath, his jaw clenched. "Madam, tell me your name." "Siobhan Murphy, sir." "Mrs. Murphy, your son Qian will have his medication tonight. Don't ask me how, just trust. And from this moment on, that boy will have his medication every month for as long as he needs it, without you ever again having to ask a doctor not to suspend it. That will come from the corporate charity foundation that my own company maintains for social cases, and which, until now, was never offered to you because no one in my management considered it important to mention." Siobhan brought both hands to her face. Tears fell unchecked. It wasn't a loud cry, but the silent, ancient weeping, contained for months, of a woman finally receiving a relief she never expected. But Liam didn't let her sink into emotion. He spoke with the gentle firmness of men who understand that this was not yet the time to rest. "Mrs. Murphy, I need you to tell me everything. But first, I need you to answer one thing with absolute honesty, even if the answer seems dangerous." "Yes, sir." "Who in this hotel gives you orders regarding the permanent guests' rooms? Who is the person who signs off on the account movements for Mrs. Meyer and the other elderly guests you just mentioned?" Siobhan swallowed. She knew that uttering that name aloud to the hotel owner in the 8th floor corridor near midnight could cost her everything she had built until then, but she also knew, with new clarity, that remaining silent would cost her something much worse. She said it. "Mr. Declan Gallagher, sir, the general manager of this hotel." Liam O'Connell didn't move, didn't blink, made no gesture, but inside, silently, he felt 20 years of blind trust begin to crumble in slow motion. Declan, the man he had considered his right hand since before inheriting the chain, the man who had stood beside his father at the founding of the family's first hotel, the man who was godfather to his eldest daughter, the man he had never, not even in his darkest paranoid thoughts, put on the suspect list. It was him, Mrs. Murphy. Liam's voice was hoarse, different. "I need you not to return home tonight through the main entrance. I need you to collect your belongings from the staff changing room without passing by the management office. And I need you to present yourself first thing tomorrow morning at the address I will send to your phone right now. Someone will be waiting for you. A solicitor I trust completely. Her name is Aweef Brennan. You will tell her everything you have just told me, and much more. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir." "One last thing." "Yes, sir. Seamus Kelly, the old concierge in the lobby. Do you know him?" Siobhan nodded. Seamus knows things he never told anyone. If you trust him, tell him tonight before you leave the building that O'Connell wants to see what he's keeping. Just that. O'Connell wants to see what he's keeping. He'll understand." Siobhan nodded again, her eyes still damp. Liam turned to leave, but before crossing the dark area of the corridor, he stopped. He turned over his shoulder and looked at her. "Mrs. Murphy, it's been years since I heard someone from my own hotel tell me the truth. Tonight, unknowingly, you returned something I believed lost. And that, madam, cannot be paid with a salary." He walked to the lift. The doors opened. He entered. The doors closed. Siobhan was left alone in the corridor, still leaning against the wall, phone in hand, eyes filled with tears. But inside her, for the first time in a very long time, there was no fear. There was something new, something different. There was the fragile but real sensation that this night had just begun another story, and that the story that had just ended the story of the woman who kept silent to survive would never open again. Several floors away, in his private office on the 12th floor, Declan Gallagher was finishing a phone call with his nephew, Rory. He was smiling. They had just closed another inflated account for Suite 814. Mrs. Maid'S, they said between laughs, was the most predictable wellspring of funds of all. Declan didn't know, as he hung up the phone and poured himself a short drink from the cabinet, that in the 8th floor corridor, a housekeeper had just spoken his name in front of the only man in the world who would never forgive him for it. Siobhan pushed the trolley towards the service lift, her heart thumping against her ribs like an ownerless fist. The 8th floor corridor remained empty. The gilded sconces were still lit. The carpet continued to absorb every step, but the woman now moving towards the service door was not the same woman who had left the staff changing room that afternoon. That woman no longer existed. The one moving now was another, one who carried Declan Gallagher's name, pronounced aloud and still lingering in the corridor's air. One who had received precise instructions from the only man in the building whose word was worth more than any signature. The service lift doors opened. Siobhan entered. She pressed the basement button. As the doors closed, she mentally repeated, word for word, the exact phrase Liam had asked her to tell the old concierge in the lobby. O'Connell wants to see what he's keeping. Just that. Nothing more. No explanations. The lift descended in silence. Siobhan looked at herself in the side mirror, adjusted her apron, wiped the tear stains from the back of her hand. When the doors opened in the basement, no trace of tears remained. She crossed the service corridor, ascended the side staircase to the main lobby. The lobby at that hour was almost empty, just two distant guests consulting something at reception. And beside the counter, a figure who had known every millimeter of that building since before she was born. Seamus Kelly, the long-serving concierge of the Emerald Grand Hotel, a man who had spent decades in that lobby, was finishing folding a newspaper when he saw Siobhan approach. He barely looked up, and for some reason she didn't initially understand, the concierge's old eyes fixed on her face as if they had been expecting her. "Seamus, say it, my dear." Siobhan glanced briefly to the sides. The night shift receptionist was busy with one of the guests. The other guest had headphones on. No one was looking at them. She leaned her lips towards the counter, lowered her voice. "Seamus, O'Connell wants to see what you're keeping." The concierge didn't respond immediately. For a full second, his face showed no emotion. Then, very slowly, he placed the folded newspaper on the counter, rested both hands on the wood, and exhaled a long breath that seemed to have been held in his chest for many years. "My dear, are you sure about what you're telling me?" "I'm sure, Seamus. He himself asked me to tell you that phrase. He was with me tonight in the 8th floor corridor. Things happened, Seamus. Something happened that I can't tell you here." The concierge nodded, reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a white handkerchief, unfolded it, and wiped his forehead with a small, silent gesture. When he looked back at Siobhan, there was a mixture of relief and weariness in his eyes that she dared not decipher. "I've been waiting for that phrase for over 15 years, my dear." Siobhan felt something run down her spine. That answer, without needing explanations, told her that the old concierge had suspected for much longer than she had ever imagined, and that he too, in his own way, had been waiting for a night like this. "Seamus, you knew?" "I know nothing, my dear. I just keep. My job is to keep things. What an old concierge keeps in a drawer at home, nobody looks for, and that's exactly what makes it useful someday." Seamus gave her a small hand gesture to withdraw. He told her in a low voice before she moved away from the counter, "Go peacefully, my dear. I'll take care of my part, and give my thanks to Mr. O'Connell for having trusted this old man after so many years of not trusting almost anyone." Siobhan nodded, withdrew, collected her belongings from the staff changing room without passing by the management office, exactly as Liam had asked her. And when she exited the Emerald Grand Hotel through the side service door, the street was cold, empty, and the city was still asleep, unaware that inside that building, another story had just begun. A few blocks away, in a modest flat in a neighborhood of narrow streets, Chian Murphy couldn't sleep. The young man, Siobhan's only son, had been tossing and turning in bed for over an hour, staring at the ceiling. The faint streetlight filtered through the low blind of his room, drawing thin stripes on the wall. Chian knew his mother was on the night shift at the hotel. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the strange tiredness that weighed on him that night, a new sensation in his chest, something he couldn't name, but he recognized it as the feeling of a day when his mother would arrive differently. Beside him, on the bedside table, his medication bottle was almost empty. Chian knew exactly how many tablets were left. He knew because he had learned from a very young age to count what sustained his life. 4 pills, 2 for the next day, 2 for the day after, then nothing. Then it depended on his mother, and his mother's phone had been off for a while that night. That wasn't normal either. The young man sat up in bed, sat on the edge, stared at the bottle for a long time, then picked up his phone, dialed his mother's number. It rang and rang and rang until finally, Siobhan's voice, more broken than usual, answered. "My love, Mum, you weren't answering. Where are you?" "I'm on my way home, son. I just left. It's late for your shift to end, Mum." There was a pause on the other end, a pause Chian immediately recognized, the pause his mother made when she was deciding how much to tell and how much to keep silent. "Mum, did something happen?" "Many things happened, my love. Good or bad." Another silence. And then an answer the young man had never heard from his mother's mouth with such calm. "Son, I don't know yet, but something happened tonight that changes a lot of things. I won't lie to you, but I can't tell you everything over the phone. I'll tell you when I get home. Okay?" "Mum, were you fired?" "No, my love, quite the opposite. I think today was the first day in years that someone in that hotel truly saw me." Chian brought his free hand to his face. He didn't know how to respond. That sentence carried a weight his mother had never allowed him to bear before. Someone truly saw me. So many years of invisibility, so many years in which he had felt, without being able to say it, that the world treated his mother as if she didn't exist. "Mum, come home quickly. I'm coming, my love." The young man ended the call, got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and as he drank, in the middle of that nocturnal silence, he heard a sound at the apartment door that didn't belong to that hour. 3 dry knocks, slow, spaced out, like the knocks of someone who knows exactly which door they are calling at. Chian stood very still. His mother was still on her way, and no one else had a reason to knock on that apartment door at this hour. He walked slowly to the peephole, put his eye to it, and saw a young man standing on the other side whom he had never seen in his life. Dark suit, backpack on his shoulder, the posture of someone looking for someone specific. The young man on the other side knocked 3 more times, exactly like the previous ones, and said in a voice that filtered through the crack in the door, "Murphy family, I'm from Pradel Vasquez Laboratories. I'm here to deliver an urgent shipment. I have orders not to leave until the package is received." Chian pressed his hand to his chest. Pradel Vasquez Laboratories was the company that produced his medication. The medication the doctor had announced hours earlier would be suspended. And at this hour, a laboratory never delivers anything by hand. Meanwhile, on a central street in the city, Liam O'Connell walked, pressing his phone to his ear, speaking in a low but firm voice. "Ife, I need you to prepare everything for first thing tomorrow morning. A woman named Siobhan Murphy will arrive at your office. She will be our best source. I want you to treat her as if she were a senior advisor to the chain. Did you hear me? As if she were a senior advisor, not an employee." On the other end of the line, Aoife Brennan, the corporate internal auditor for the O'Connell Hotel Group, a woman of surgical rigor whom he had hired months ago, precisely for situations like this, listened with the cold concentration of those who understand they are entering a big case. "Liam, what position does this woman hold today?" There was a brief silence on the other end. "Housekeeper, Aoife." Aoife took 2 seconds to respond. When she did so without surprise. "Understood, Liam. I will receive her, as if she were a senior advisor. Anything else?" "Yes. Call the corporate charity foundation now to release the medical emergency fund. Tonight, a minor named Chian Murphy needs urgent medication. Mobilize everything. Have Pradel Vasquez Laboratories deliver the shipment tonight, regardless of the hour, and have the cost debited directly from the corporate account. not from the hotel's account. Under no circumstances should the Emerald Grand Hotel management be informed of this movement. Did you hear me, Aife? Under no circumstances. I heard you. I'll do it now. Liam hung up and continued walking. The city around him seemed, for the first time in years, a place he didn't entirely control, but also, for the first time in years, a place where something could still be saved. Back at the Murphy family flat, Qian opened the door with the deadbolt engaged, leaving the chain on. The young man in the dark suit bowed his head respectfully. He held a sealed envelope in one hand and a small refrigerated package in the other. Apologies for the hour, young man. I have orders not to deliver this shipment to anyone other than the recipient or a direct family member. It is strictly continuous medication. We called your mother's phone, and she didn't answer. We came directly. If you sign the receipt, I'll leave the package here and depart. Qian looked at the envelope. On the sender's address, written in clear letters, was O'Connell Corporate Foundation, Social Emergency Unit. The young man felt the world tilt on its axis. O'Connell, the hotel chain where his mother worked, the company he had for years imagined as a cold building on the other side of the city where no one remembered his mother existed. And from that same company, that very night, a package of medication arrived at the apartment door with his mother's name written on the side. Qian signed the receipt, his hand still trembling. The young man from the laboratory handed him the refrigerated package, gave a small professional bow, and left without another word. The young man closed the door, stood in the apartment hallway with the package in his hands. He opened it carefully. Inside, perfectly preserved, was the medication he would need for the coming months. And next to the medication, a small printed card with a single handwritten line, so that no child ever again depends on their mother's silence. LMOC. Qian read the card 3 times, and then, with the card pressed against his chest, he heard his mother's key turning in the lock of the main door. Siobhan entered the flat. Her eyes were tired. Her face bore the marks of a 100-year night. But when she saw her son standing in the middle of the hallway with the laboratory box in his hands and the card in his palm, she knew, without needing to ask, that something in that home had just changed forever. Mother and son looked at each other in silence. And then Qian, his voice breaking, simply said, "Mum, who is LMOC?" Siobhan felt the air leave her chest, but before she could respond, her phone rang again. The chime cut through the apartment's silence like a knife. It was a message from Afe Brennan. 2 lines. "Mrs. Murphy, I await you at my office tomorrow, and please bring any documents you have regarding Suite 814's movements. Tonight, an Emerald Grand Hotel guest attempted to cancel Mrs. Meyer-Walsh's reservation without prior notice. The operation was stopped in time, but she is no longer safe in that hotel." Siobhan brought her free hand to her mouth. Declan Gallagher had just made the first move to get rid of the living evidence. And the living evidence was a defenseless old woman living alone in Suite 814 of the Emerald Grand Hotel. Siobhan read Aife's message 3 times before moving. Then she looked up at her son, who was still standing in the apartment hallway, with the laboratory package in his hands and the card pressed to his chest. She said, "I have to go back to the hotel now." "Mum, you just got home." "I know, Qian, but there's someone in that hotel who's alone. Someone who looked after me when I was your age. And tonight they tried to remove her from her room without warning." Qian asked no more. He looked down at the package, then looked at his mother, and for the first time that night, something new appeared on the young man's face. It wasn't fear. It was the adult decision of a son who understood, in a fraction of a second, that his mother was no longer asking permission to live. "Go, Mum. I'll put this in the fridge. Look after Mrs. Mayer. I'm all right here." Siobhan approached, kissed his forehead, stroked the back of his neck with her free hand, and whispered something that Qian would remember for the rest of his life, though neither of them knew it yet. "My love, if I don't make it back for breakfast tonight, take that card you have in your hand, the one that says LMOC. Call the number on the other side of the card, and tell that person, without trembling, that you are Siobhan Murphy's son. That person will look after you." Qian nodded in silence. His eyes were bright, but he didn't let a single tear fall. He realized that tonight his mother was treating him for the first time as an adult, and he understood that the only correct way to honor that treatment was to respond with the maturity of the adult she was seeing. Siobhan left the apartment. The Emerald Grand Hotel already seemed like a different building at that hour. The main lobby was half lit. Niamh Doyle, the night shift receptionist, looked up when she saw Siobhan enter through the side service door. From the housekeeper's face, Niamh immediately understood that something big was happening in the building. Siobhan crossed the lobby without greeting, called the service lift, and ascended to the 8th floor. When the doors opened, she found the corridor changed. There were 2 security personnel standing in front of suite 814. One of them was a guard she had rarely seen, a young man with a nervous look. The other was an older man with a calm presence, whom she had never seen in that building. Siobhan approached. The young guard stepped forward and blocked her path. "Housekeeper, this room is under security control by management instruction. No entry allowed. And the guest, Mrs. Mera, is she all right? The guest is being relocated to another property of the chain for administrative reasons. She is already being notified." Siobhan felt the blood rush to her face. Relocated by whom? Tonight, at this hour? The young guard hesitated, about to respond, but before he could utter a word, the other man, the older one, the one with the calm presence, stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Murphy, my name is Finbar O'Dwyer. I am the new head of corporate night security for the chain. I arrived 40 minutes ago by direct order of Mr. O'Connell. This room is no longer under hotel management control. It is under my control, and the guest is not going anywhere." The young guard paled. Finbar turned to him with professional calm. "I invite you to return to your post in the lobby. Your presence on this floor is no longer necessary. And please, inform Mr. Gallagher, if he asks, that suite 814 is stable and that the guest will remain in it tonight." The young guard nodded, not quite understanding what was happening. He walked to the lift. The doors closed behind him. Finbar O'Dwyer looked at Siobhan with respect. "Madam, Mr. O'Connell gave me clear instructions. You have free access to this suite. Mrs. Mayer is already aware of what happened. She is fine. She is waiting for you." Siobhan nodded. She adjusted her apron, approached the door, and knocked gently with her knuckles. "Mrs. Mayer, it's me." The fragile voice from the other side responded immediately. "Come in, my dear. Come in." Inside the suite, Mrs. Mayer Walsh was sitting in the living room armchair with a blanket over her legs and a teacup in her hands. Her white hair was gathered in a spotless bun despite the hour. When she saw Siobhan enter, she extended her free hand with the calm of an old aristocrat. "Come, my dear, sit here with me." Siobhan sat on the edge of the armchair and took her hand. Mayer's hands were fine, cold, ancient, like a letter kept in a drawer. "Mrs. Mayer, did they do anything to you?" "No, my dear, they didn't do anything to me. Some men from the hotel arrived a while ago. They told me I had to move to another property of the chain, that it was for my own good. I told them no. I told them this is my home, that I've been here for years, and that if they wanted to remove me, they had to call my solicitor." They just looked at each other for a moment. And then this new security man, the one from the corridor, arrived, told them to leave, and they left, my dear. Without arguing, like dogs receiving an order from a new owner, Siobhan brought her free hand to her mouth. The old woman, sharp as a tack despite her years, had alone withstood Declan's first assault and had bought enough time for Liam's network to protect her. "Mrs. Mayer, I have some things to tell you tonight. Things I couldn't tell you before. Things that have been happening in this hotel for months and that I didn't speak about because I was afraid." "My dear, I already know." Siobhan looked up in surprise. "What do you mean, I already know, Siobhan?" "Not everything, but quite a lot. An old woman who has spent years in the same place, my dear, sees things, and even if she doesn't understand the numbers on the bills, she understands when a manager looks at her differently. I suspected Declan for a long time, but since I suspected alone, I couldn't do anything. And because you also suspected, my dear, and I saw it on your face when you entered this room, all I could do was wait for life to give you a day like today." Siobhan felt her eyes fill with tears. "Mrs. Mayer, why did you never tell me anything?" "Because you had a sick child, my dear, and I didn't want to be the reason you risked that boy's livelihood. I am old, Siobhan. I have lived my life. Your son is just beginning. I would rather have left this hotel quietly than see Xian without his medication." Siobhan buried her face in her hands. She cried without hiding it. She cried for years of silence, for years of shared solitude without having known it, for the elderly woman who had been willing to lose everything in silence so that her son would lose nothing. "Mrs. Mayer, do you remember my mum?" The old woman smiled, a small, ancient smile that seemed to come from very far back in time. "How could I not remember, my dear? Your mum, Roisin, was my dearest friend. I met her when we were both young. My husband and I couldn't have children. Your mum didn't have you yet either. When you finally arrived, your mum told me, 'Maye, this little girl will be as much yours as mine.' And I held you in my arms before almost anyone else in this world. When your mum passed away, I made a promise to her by her bedside, my dear, I promised her that as long as I lived, you wouldn't be alone. That's why I helped you get into this hotel. And that's why, my dear, tonight, when those men tried to remove me, the only thing I thought was, if they remove me, Siobhan loses the only person who is still looking after her. They weren't going to remove me. Siobhan broke down completely, knelt in front of the old woman's armchair, rested her head on Maya's lap, and wept as she hadn't allowed herself to weep in decades. Maya gently stroked her hair with her fine, ancient hands, as she had stroked Roisin's on the day the promise was made. My dear, wherever your mum Roisin is today, she is breathing easy for the first time in many years. Several floors away, in his private office on the 12th floor, Declan Gallagher hung up the phone with a smile that had frozen halfway. The young guard he had sent to the 8th floor had just informed him that Mrs. Maid'S' relocation had been stopped by a new head of night security named Finbar O'Dwyer. Declan had never heard that name. Declan hadn't hired anyone by that name, which meant only one thing. Liam O'Connell, the chain owner, the man Declan believed to be asleep in his private mansion on the other side of the city, had sent his own head of security to the 8th floor of the Emerald Grand Hotel that very night, without informing the general manager, without going through any internal channels, which meant that Liam knew something. Declan poured himself another short drink from the cabinet, but this time his hand trembled as he poured it. For the first time in many years, he felt something he almost no longer remembered the name of: fear. He picked up the phone again, dialed his nephew's number, Rory Gallagher. Rory, wake up. We have a problem. Uncle, it's almost 3 a.m. Wake up. I told you we have a problem. O'Connell sent his own people to the hotel tonight. He put a head of security on the 8th floor who doesn't report to me. They stopped the old woman's relocation. Something is moving, Rory, and it's not moving in our favor. There was a silence on the other end of the line. When Rory responded, his voice was more awake than it had been all night. Uncle, I know who could have tipped him off. Who? The housekeeper on the 8th floor. That older woman with the strange eyes, Murphy. She's been giving me bad vibes for a while. Declan remained silent, gripping the glass between his fingers. Rory, I need that woman not to reach Aoife Brennan's office tomorrow morning. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understand, Uncle. How do you want me to stop her? I don't care how, but stop that woman before she gets there. If Aoife hears what that housekeeper has to say, by this time tomorrow, you and I will both be signing statements at a Garda station. Rory ended the call. Declan stared at the liquor glass without moving. Outside the 12th floor window, the city was still sleeping. But inside that office, in silence, a man who for years had believed himself untouchable had just ordered the only thing he should never have dared to order. And a woman, who at that hour was embracing an old lady in Suite 814, had no idea that while she comforted the elderly woman, someone had just decided she would not reach the auditor's office the next morning. The first lights of dawn were beginning to color the city when Siobhan finally left. Suite 814 of the Emerald Grand Hotel. Mrs. Mayer had fallen asleep in the armchair with the blanket over her legs and the empty teacup beside her. Finbar O'Dwyer, the new head of night security, remained steadfast in the corridor with the posture of someone who had no intention of moving until his trusted replacement arrived. Before going down to the lobby, Siobhan took her phone from her apron pocket. Aoife Brennan's message was still there, blinking on the screen. She replied with a single line. I'm coming to your office now, Miss Brennan. I have what you asked for and much more. Aoife responded in less than a minute. I'll be waiting. The address will be sent to your phone in 30 seconds. And please, Mrs. Murphy, do not take a taxi from the hotel door. Walk 2 blocks north and take one from there. It's important. Siobhan read the message twice. That it's important needed no explanation. The auditor also knew something was stirring in the shadows. She went down the service lift, crossed the main lobby in silence. Neve Doyle, the night shift receptionist, barely looked up when she saw the housekeeper pass. For a fraction of a second, the two women's gazes met in the empty lobby, and in that fraction of a second, Neve did something Siobhan hadn't expected. She gave a minimal nod, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, the gesture of someone who has been silent for months and suddenly dares to make it understood, without words, that she understood everything that was happening. Siobhan returned the gesture and continued walking towards the side service door. When she stepped out onto the street, the dawn air hit her face with a clean chill. She remembered Aoife's instruction: walk 2 blocks north. The city center streets at that hour were still almost empty, with the first street vendors beginning to open their stalls on the pavements and a distant smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from some 2-4 hour newsagent. Half a block from the junction where she planned to hail a taxi, Siobhan noticed something: a dark car parked against the opposite pavement, with its engine running and tinted windows. There was nothing particularly unusual about a car parked at that hour in that area, but something about that vehicle put her on alert without her even knowing why. The engine idling slowly, the exact position of the car opposite the hotel's side exit, and the driver, whom she couldn't fully see through the tinted glass, but whose silhouette leaned forward every time she took a step. Siobhan felt her heart race. She remembered Aifa's words. "It's important." She remembered Liam's words from the previous night. Under no circumstances should the Emerald Grand Hotel management be informed. She recalled Declan Gallagher's face, which she had seen so many times in the 12th floor corridor, that easy smile that so often seemed excessive, and understood in a fraction of a second that the person in the car opposite was no coincidence. A few blocks away, Rory Gallagher closed his phone inside the car. He himself had parked opposite the hotel's side exit almost an hour ago. He had received his uncle's order in the middle of the night and had arrived in record time. The instruction had been clear: stop Siobhan before she reached the auditor's office, and how he stopped her was his business. Rory was 26, with an ambition he confused with intelligence and the very common belief among junior accomplices that difficult things always happen to someone else. He saw Siobhan leave the hotel, watched her walk north, started the car engine, waited for her to advance 2 blocks, then released the brake and began to move slowly, always keeping half a block away. He wasn't going to do anything physical to her. Rory wasn't that kind of accomplice. His plan was rather to intercept her on a side street, introduce himself as a hotel representative with a sealed envelope in hand, offer her generous compensation for services rendered in exchange for a signed resignation on the spot, and drive her to the hotel to sign the papers before his uncle's solicitor friend. The plan was simple, clean, without scandal, and in Rory's mind, totally possible. What Rory didn't know was that 3 cars behind his own, another vehicle had been following him for some time, a black, unassuming sedan, without markings. And inside that sedan, in the passenger seat, traveled an older man with a calm presence, wearing a concierge jacket, but no longer on duty. Seamus Kelly had not returned home after finishing his shift. He had received a brief message on his phone 20 minutes ago from Liam O'Connell, which read, "Seamus, if Mrs. Murphy leaves the hotel alone, follow her yourself. Finbar O'Dwyer is busy on the 8th floor. Do not leave her unprotected. Sending a car to pick you up in 5 minutes." Seamus had put his phone away without replying. He had waited at the hotel door until Finbar gestured from the lobby that Siobhan was coming down. He had left through the staff entrance. The sedan had picked him up at the corner, and since then, the driver, a security professional from the O'Connell chain, maintained the exact distance that allowed them to see the suspicious car ahead without being seen. "Seamus," the driver said in a low voice, "the one in front is approaching the lady. Should I move in?" "Not yet. Let him show his hand first." The sedan followed at a distance. Rory accelerated slightly. Siobhan, half a block ahead, had stopped walking. She was standing in front of a 2-4 hour newsagent, pretending to look at the magazines in the window, but in reality, she had her phone in her hand, dialing a number Seamus couldn't see. Seamus's phone vibrated. It was her. "Seamus, there's a car following me." "I know, my dear. I'm right behind you. Don't worry. Keep walking as if you haven't seen it. At the next corner, turn right. Don't look back. I'll take care of it." "Seamus, you're out on the street. It's been 20 years since Mr. O'Connell asked this old man a favor, my dear. I wasn't going to fail him on the first try." Siobhan felt her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She ended the call, put her phone in her pocket, walked to the corner, turned right as Seamus had instructed, and then something moved quickly behind her. Rory Gallagher saw the housekeeper turn the corner. He accelerated. When he turned, a fraction of a second later, he found the street different from what he had imagined. Siobhan was still walking, yes, but on the other side of the street, parked against the pavement, was a black sedan with the passenger door open, and stepping out of the sedan, with disconcerting calm, was an older man whom Rory immediately recognized, the lobby concierge, the old man from the Emerald Grand Hotel, the man Rory had ignored for months every time he entered the building to meet with his uncle. Seamus crossed the street with a firm step, raised his hand, not to threaten, but to indicate, and when Rory reluctantly stopped the car, Seamus approached the driver's window with a serenity the young man had never seen in him. He tapped the glass with 2 knuckles. Rory lowered it. "Young Gallagher." Rory swallowed. The concierge knew him by name. What do you want, old man? I want you to turn off the engine, get out of the car, and sit with us in the sedan behind. We need to talk. I have nothing to discuss with a concierge. Seamus smiled faintly, a small, patient, ancient smile. It's not with me you need to talk, young man. It's with Miss Brennan, who has been waiting for you in her office for an hour. Your uncle sent you to stop her. She is waiting for you. Decide how you prefer to get to that office, young man. On your own feet, talking with us, or accompanied by people who won't ask you twice. Behind the black sedan, at the corner, another vehicle had appeared without Rory noticing it earlier. Another dark car, another driver, another man from Liam's corporate security team. The networks the chain owner had woven in a few hours were denser than Rory had ever imagined. The young man stared at Seamus in silence, and for the first time in that long night, the exact expression appeared on his face that so many junior accomplices wear when they understand, too late, that their side wasn't the winning side. He got out of the car. Seamus escorted him to the sedan. The door closed behind him. Siobhan, from half a block ahead, saw the entire maneuver over her shoulder. She didn't stop. She continued walking towards the junction, where she would finally hail a taxi to get to Aoife's office. But before calling a taxi, her phone vibrated again. It was Liam. "Mrs. Murphy, are you all right?" "I'm fine, sir." Seamus just picked up Rory Gallagher from the street. There was a silence on the other end of the line. When Liam responded, his voice was different. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something very similar to the pain of a man who was finishing accepting the exact size of the betrayal he had lived under his own roof. "Madam, I need you to go to Aoife's office. I need you to tell everything, and I need you to stay there until further notice. Today at 11 a.m., I am convening an emergency meeting of the O'Connell Hotel Group's board of directors in this very building. I want you to be present when we summon Declan Gallagher to that meeting. I want him to see you enter the room. I want him to know from your face that the silence he bought for years has just ended." Siobhan didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was firm. "I'll be there, sir." She ended the call, hailed a taxi, and got in. The taxi started towards the neighborhood where Aoife Brennan was waiting for her. But as the taxi moved through the streets that were beginning to wake up, Siobhan's phone vibrated once more. It wasn't Liam, it wasn't Aoife, it was Chian. Siobhan answered. "Mum, there's someone at the apartment door. They're ringing the intercom. They won't say their name. They say they're from the hotel." Siobhan felt the air leave her chest. Declan Gallagher had just moved the second piece, and this time the piece was her son. Siobhan pressed the phone to her ear with a hand that no longer trembled. The taxi moved along the avenues that were beginning to awaken, and the city took on the pale blue color of the early hours. Chian's voice on the other end of the line sounded calm, too calm for a young man his age facing this alone. "Mum, do you want me to open it?" "No, my love, don't open. Put me on the building intercom. Tell them it's you talking to me, and put the receiver to my ear." "Mum, the doorman isn't there. He hasn't been answering downstairs for a while." The one who rang spoke through the intercom directly to the flat. Siobhan felt her chest constrict. The building doorman, Brendan Lynch, had been in that position for years. His absence from his post in the hall at dawn was strange. Too strange. "Son, listen to me calmly. You don't open the door to anyone. Do you understand? To anyone. And you're going to do something else. You're going to get the card I left you last night, the one that says LMOC. You're going to call the number on the back. You're going to say you're Siobhan Murphy's son, and you're going to tell him what's happening right now. Go on." "I'm doing it now, Mum. Don't worry." "And Cian." "Yes, Mum. Don't be afraid, son. This time, you're not alone." Siobhan hung up. She immediately dialed another number. Liam answered on the first ring. "Mr. O'Connell, there's someone at the door of my son's building who says they're from the hotel. The building doorman isn't at his post, and my son is alone upstairs." There was a very short pause on the other end of the line. When Liam responded, his voice was in a different tone. Not the businessman's tone, but the tone of a man who understands in a fraction of a second that the war has just moved from his building to someone else's. "Mrs. Murphy, give me the exact address of your building. Finbar O'Dwyer is already on his way. He'll get there before anyone else. Trust me." Siobhan dictated the address in a calm voice. She hung up. The taxi continued towards Aoife's office, but for the next few minutes, Siobhan was the only person in the vehicle who seemed not to be fully present. Her body was in the back seat. Her mind was divided between two places in the city: the apartment where her son was deciding whether or not to open the door, and the office where an auditor awaited her to hear the truth that would bring down a powerful man. A few kilometers away, at the door of the Murphy family building, a man in a grey suit persisted with the intercom while checking his phone. He carried a white envelope under his arm and the professional expression of someone fulfilling an assignment he wasn't too interested in, but which paid well. He didn't know that the person who had hired him was Rory Gallagher's nephew, Declan Gallagher. On one side of the family tree, Rory, in his attempt to cover the last piece, had sent an external messenger with an envelope offering the Murphy family immediate social assistance in exchange for the mother signing a short letter of voluntary resignation from the hotel at the moment of receiving the envelope. It was clumsy. It was desperate. It was the last-ditch effort of a man who was already losing. The man in the grey suit didn't get to ring the doorbell a third time. Behind him, 2 dark cars stopped at the curb. From one, Finbar O'Dwyer emerged, with the calm posture of the man who had already spent 12 hours resolving emergencies. From the other, a young man stepped out, wearing a visible badge of the O'Connell chain's corporate security team. Finbar approached the man in the grey suit. He asked him, without raising his voice, to identify himself. The man, seeing the credentials, tried to back away. Finbar stopped him with a gesture of his hand. "The envelope you are carrying, sir, contains content related to a minor in this country that requires special documentation. I am going to ask you to accompany me to the local Garda station. The complaint is already being filed at this moment. If your intention was to deliver an innocent paper, you will have no problems. If it was something else, you also won't have much room to invent something along the way." The man in the grey suit did not respond. He allowed himself to be led to one of the dark cars. Meanwhile, the second man from the team approached the building's intercom. He pressed the Murphy's apartment button. Chian's voice answered immediately. "Yes, young Murphy, I am from Mr. O'Connell's team. Your mother informed us. We have already intercepted the gentleman who rang the bell. Everything is under control. I will come up to verify that everything is in order inside the apartment if you authorize me." Chian breathed for the first time in what felt like an hour. "Come up, sir." When Siobhan's taxi stopped at the entrance of Aoife Brennan's office, the housekeeper's phone vibrated. It was a brief message from Liam. "Your son is fine." The individual was intercepted before going upstairs. "Finbar will send you photos of the operation as soon as he is free. Concentrate on the meeting, Mrs. Murphy. The difficult part of today has not yet begun." Siobhan read the message, closed her eyes for a second, paid the taxi driver, and got out. The building where the O'Connell Hotel Group's corporate internal audit operated was a sober office building of grey marble and dark glass in a central area that Siobhan had often seen from the bus, but into which she had never entered. She took the lift up to the floor where they were waiting for her. The doors opened to a clean, silent corridor with live plants in large pots. Aoife Brennan came out to greet her in person, a young woman with a firm step, dressed in a sober suit. When she saw Siobhan, she did something the housekeeper hadn't expected. She greeted her with the same professional deference she would have extended to a senior executive. "Mrs. Murphy, please come in. We have been waiting for you for a long time." Siobhan stood in the corridor for an instant. "Miss Brennan, forgive me, but I know well who I am. It's not necessary for you to treat me this way." Aoife looked her in the eyes and responded with a calm that had a sharp edge to it. "Madam, Liam ordered me to treat you as a senior advisor to the chain, but I will confess something. When he gave me that order last night, I had an instant. Just an instant. But I had it in which I thought, what an exaggeration. A housekeeper. I went down to the building's cafe while waiting for you. I spent 20 minutes thinking about that instant and came back up ashamed of myself, madam, because I understood that the first person who had judged by the uniform before listening was me. I'm sorry, and I ask you to allow me to listen to you now with the attention you deserve." Siobhan didn't respond immediately. When she did, she smiled faintly. A small, tired, beautiful smile. "Thank you for your honesty, Miss Brennan. Let's go in." The two women entered the office. On the meeting table, a folder was already open. Inside, Siobhan recognized copies of Mrs. Mayor's account movements, lists of phantom charges, and, what surprised her most, photocopies of old typewritten documents that could be nothing other than Seamus Kelly's personal archive. Delivered that very morning. Aoife handed her a cup of coffee, sat opposite her, and switched on a small recorder. "Mrs. Murphy, let's start at the beginning. Tell me what you've seen in recent months." Omitting nothing, Siobhan took a deep breath and began to speak. Many kilometers away, in his private house, Declan Gallagher was finishing shaving in front of the bathroom mirror. He hadn't slept. He had spent the whole night trying to contact Rory, and his nephew's phone was still busy. He had tried to contact the man in the grey suit, who also wasn't answering. He had tried to contact the young guard he had sent to the 8th floor the previous night. He wasn't responding either. For the first time in many years, none of his pieces were responding. Then his phone rang. On the screen appeared the name he least expected at that hour, Liam O'Connell. He answered with a steady hand, an old skill of men accustomed to pretending. "Liam, my dear, did something happen?" Liam's voice was cordial, too cordial. "Declan, I need you to come to the hotel today at 11 sharp. I've called an extraordinary board meeting. Nothing serious. Operational matter. Can you confirm you'll be there?" "Of course, Liam, I'll be there. One more thing, Declan. Come dressed formally. There will be people from outside the chain present." "Yes, I'll be formal, Liam. Don't worry. I'll see you there, brother." Liam hung up. Declan stared at the mirror for a long time. Brother. The word had sounded like a farewell, but Liam had always been a direct man. If he had suspected something serious, he wouldn't have called him. He would have sent someone to fetch him. Declan finished shaving, dressed in one of his best suits, quickly drank a coffee, and headed for the Emerald Grand Hotel, with the same easy smile that had opened doors for him his entire life. At 11 sharp, the hotel's boardroom was already full. The board members, senior businessmen, long-standing legal advisors to the chain, 2 regional directors who had flown in urgently on private jets, occupied the seats around the large oak table. Aoife Brennan was at the end of the table with her laptop open. Seamus Kelly was seated against the side wall, serene, with a thick envelope on his lap. Finbar O'Dwyer stood by the door with his arms crossed. Liam O'Connell presided over the table, and at the back of the room, in a small anteroom with tinted glass opposite the entrance, a space originally designed for protocol assistants to follow meetings without participating, Siobhan Murphy sat in silence. From behind that glass, she could see the entire room, but those in the room could not see her. At 11:02, the room door opened. Declan Gallagher entered with his easy smile, his impeccable suit, his open greeting to the board members. He greeted Liam with a firm handshake. He took his designated seat to the right of the chain owner. "Liam, here I am. Tell me, what's the urgency about?" Liam looked at him for a long second, then opened a folder in front of him and turned it towards Declan. "Declan, before we start, look at this." Declan lowered his eyes. He saw a first document, a bank transaction, his name, his signature, the parallel account. He looked up, his smile frozen halfway. "Liam, this can be explained." "I'm listening, Declan. It's an internal treasury movement, an intercompany loan. I was going to mention it to you last week, but, Declan, do you want to explain this one too?" Liam turned a second document, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, each more compromising than the last. Declan, sitting to the right of the chain owner, watched as every fraudulent move he had built over years appeared on the oak table like cards. Someone a much better player had just laid down all at once. When Liam turned the 7th document, the complete list of phantom charges to Mrs. Mayor Walsh's account over recent months, signed, authorizing collection by DG, Declan Gallagher lowered his gaze, and for the first time in his adult life, he found no ready smile to offer. Liam closed the folder, rested his hands on the table. "Declan, there's one person in this building who tonight brought you to your knees without laying a finger on you. Just one person. Declan, the person you and your nephew sent to stop before she reached this meeting. The person whose sick child you tried to use as leverage this very morning." Declan raised his head. "Liam, what person?" Liam raised his hand, gestured towards the anteroom at the back. The tinted glass door opened, and Siobhan Murphy entered the boardroom. Declan Gallagher froze in his chair. He watched her approach slowly, her back straight, the hotel apron still over her uniform, her eyes serene, the eyes of the woman who for years had been invisible in his corridors. And he understood in that second that the person he had decided to treat as a piece of furniture was the only person in that building who had never forgotten how to be human. Liam stood up. "Declan, before the solicitors and board members speak, this lady will speak, because the first person who has the right to tell you what you did is not me, it's her." And Siobhan Murphy, standing at the edge of the oak table, facing the man who had tried to make her disappear that very morning, opened her mouth to speak. Siobhan Murphy stood at the edge of the oak table. The boardroom of the Emerald Grand Hotel watched her in silence. The board members, the legal advisors, the regional directors, people who, in another life, would never have listened to a housekeeper at such a table, waited with the motionless attention given to someone about to change the air of a room. Declan Gallagher remained seated to Liam's right. His easy smile had vanished. On his face was the expression of a man seeing himself from the outside for the first time. Siobhan took a deep breath. She thought of her mother, Roisin, who had dreamed of her going to university. She thought of Sian, who that very morning had opened his door to strangers without trembling. She thought of Mrs. Maid'S, who had stood alone against 2 hotel men, demanding they call her solicitor. She thought of Seamus, who had kept an envelope for 15 years, waiting for someone willing to read it. She thought of herself, sliding down the wall of the 8th floor corridor with the doctor's phone against her ear, and she began to speak. "Mr. Gallagher, I cleaned your office for years. I cleaned the glasses on the side table. I cleaned the dust that gathered on the picture frames. I cleaned the papers you dropped to the floor without bending to pick them up. I always did it with respect because my mother taught me that work is work. But there were things I also saw, sir. I saw small accounts that passed under the desk that you signed, without looking at the person receiving them. I saw an elderly woman named Maid'S, who has lived alone in this building since before I started here, receiving charges she never could have ordered. I saw your nephew, young Rory Gallagher, leave at odd hours through the service door with a closed folder in his hand. I saw many things, sir, and for years I didn't speak because my son depends on medication, and because you, unknowingly, owned my silence." The room was in absolute silence. Declan lowered his gaze. "Last night, something happened that took away that silence. Last night, a man I didn't know stood in my floor's corridor and asked me a question no one had ever asked me before. And this morning, that same man looked after my son when you, sir, sent a messenger to my building's door to buy my family with an envelope. I don't want to talk about myself now, sir. I want to talk about Mrs. Maid'S, because Mrs. Maid'S is the person who was left alone last night in a room facing 2 men who tried to remove her from her home. And she is the person you stole from for months, knowing she couldn't defend herself. And for that person, sir, I ask nothing for myself. I ask that you return everything you took from her, down to the last penny. And I also ask that you apologize to her in person, looking her in the face, before this room decides what it will do with you." Declan Gallagher did not respond. His hands trembled on the table. Aoife Brennan opened her laptop and began to read aloud the complete list of phantom charges, authorization by authorization, date by date. The final figure, when it was reached, was large enough for 2 regional directors to bring their hands to their foreheads. Liam O'Connell stood up, walked to the side door of the room, opened it, and in walked Mrs. Maid'S Walsh. The old woman walked slowly, leaning on a thin cane she almost never used in public, but which that day she had decided to use, so that the entire room would see her walk as she walked, fragile in body, intact in spirit. Finbar O'Dwyer had accompanied her silently from the lift. Mrs. Maid'S advanced to the front of the oak table. She looked at Declan. "Mr. Gallagher, my husband left this place as my last home. I trusted this hotel, and this hotel trusted you. I don't know if I will live many more years, but the years I have left, I don't want to spend holding a grudge against you. I will tell you the only thing I have to say, and then I will never speak to you again. My husband would have said that a man who steals from a lonely old woman is a man no one will ever be able to help. I will add only one thing from my part. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, sir, but because I do not want to carry the burden of not having forgiven you." Declan Gallagher lowered his head. For the first time in that room, his shoulders shook. He didn't allow himself explicit crying, but something broke inside him that even he hadn't known was whole until then. Mrs. Maid'S turned, walked slowly to where Siobhan was, took her hand, and before the entire room, told her aloud what she had kept silent all those years. "My dear, wherever your mum Roisin is today, she is proud, and so am I." Siobhan brought her free hand to her mouth. Tears fell, this time without her trying to hide them. Aoife Brennan then led the proceedings. Declan Gallagher was removed from his position in that same session. Assisted by his solicitor, he accepted a collaborative process that included the full return of the documented amounts, the transfer of assets to cover the documented losses, and submission to corresponding civil consequences. Rory Gallagher, the nephew, had already signed a statement in Aoife's office that same morning, before the board, in which he provided operational details in exchange for a reduced process. Seamus Kelly sat against the side wall with the empty envelope on his lap. For the first time in 15 years, his archive ceased to be a silent burden and became signed justice. The man in the grey suit, intercepted at the Murphy family building door, had been handed over to the appropriate Garda station. The doorman, Brendan Lynch, was found locked in the building's service room, where he had been put to distract him during the maneuver. He had a small bump on his forehead, and much more fear than physical harm. Liam personally took care of covering the doorman's and his family's medical treatment. Before the end of the session, Liam O'Connell spoke one last time. "Members of the board, Nothing that happened this past day would have been possible without three people whom this chain must name aloud. Seamus Kelly, who kept the archive that this room has just read for 15 years. Mrs. Meyer Walsh, who waited alone, confronting this company because she believed in a woman who carried another's child in her arms. And Mrs. Siobhan Murphy, who tonight opened a door that I, owner of this chain, had kept closed out of fear for years. To all three, we owe something no salary can pay. What we can do is not pretend it didn't happen. Liam took a breath and continued, as of today, in every hotel of the O'Connell chain, a new figure will exist. The advocate for vulnerable guests. Their mission will be to protect elderly guests, solitary guests, guests in fragile condition, against any irregularity committed by the hotel's own staff. This advocacy will have direct authority over the management of each property and will report to the chain's presidency without passing through any intermediate management. The first advocate for vulnerable guests of the O'Connell chain will be Mrs. Siobhan Murphy. Siobhan looked up in surprise. If she accepts, Liam added, with a deserving salary, a team under her charge, and permanent coverage of her son's medical treatment through the corporate charity foundation, without conditions, until the last day of that boy's medical need. The room fell silent. Then someone applauded, then another, then the entire room. It was not a polite applause. It was something else. Siobhan looked at Mrs. Meyer, looked at Seamus, looked at Liam. I accept, sir. Some weeks later, one ordinary morning, the lobby of the Emerald Grand Hotel dawned with a small bronze plaque on the side wall next to Seamus's counter. The plaque bore no personal name, only a phrase engraved in simple letters. In this hotel, no guest is alone. In this hotel, no employee is invisible. Seamus Kelly personally cleaned it every morning until the last day of his working life. He retired sometime later with a small, intimate ceremony in the lobby. Liam offered him extraordinary severance. Seamus accepted half and asked that the other half be donated to the Pediatric Medication Foundation that the hotel was already supporting with Sheehan's case. He lived his last years writing letters to his grandchildren, reading old books, and visiting Mrs. Meyer in her suite every fortnight. Mrs. Meyer Walsh received the full return of every cent that had been stolen from her. But she kept almost none of the money. She dedicated it entirely to a trust fund in Sean Murphy's name for his future university studies. When Siobhan tried to refuse, Mrs. Meyer took her hands across the table in Suite 814 and said with the intact lucidity of 73 years, "My dear, your mother Roisin made me promise that as long as I lived, you wouldn't be alone. I kept that promise to you throughout my life. But now it's my turn to keep it for your son. Let me fulfill it, my dear. Don't take it from me." Siobhan couldn't respond. She just rested her head on the old woman's frail shoulder. Declan Gallagher fully complied with the restitution agreement. He lost his home. He lost his reputation in the hotel industry. He lost the social circle that had supported him for decades. His nephew, Rory Gallagher, however, took a different path. After facing justice, he enrolled in a university extension program on business ethics, and sometime later sent Siobhan a brief, handwritten letter in which he apologized without asking for anything in return. The letter arrived at Siobhan's new office at the corporate headquarters. She read it twice, put it in a drawer, didn't reply, but didn't tear it up either. Some pardons are not granted with words, she thought, but neither are they denied with silence. Aoife Brennan was confirmed as the Director of Compliance for the O'Connell chain across all properties in the country. She reformulated internal governance protocols, presented the O'Connell case at an International Business Audit Congress as an ethical benchmark, and never again judged, even for an instant, the uniform before listening to the person. Finbar O'Dwyer became the permanent head of corporate security. Niamh Doyle, the night shift receptionist, he was promoted to general coordinator of night service after delivering to Aoife, the day after the board meeting, a notebook with notes on strange movements she had observed for months without daring to report. When Siobhan asked her why she hadn't spoken sooner, Niamh replied with bright eyes, "Because until this week, madam, I didn't know you could speak in this building." One morning, well into another season, Siobhan Murphy arrived early at the corporate headquarters of the O'Connell chain. She had a meeting with the advocacy team first thing. Before going up to her office, she stopped in the building's lobby. On the wall, next to the counter, a larger bronze plaque had been installed the previous month. It bore the names of the elderly and solitary guests whom the advocacy service currently protected in each property of the chain. The first name on the list, in simple letters, read, Mrs. Meyer Walsh, Suite 814, the Emerald Grand Hotel. Siobhan ran her fingers over the bronze. then went upstairs. In her office, two things awaited her: a cup of coffee prepared by her secretary, who had learned in a few weeks not to call her Madam Director, because Siobhan insisted on being called by her first name, and on the desk, a sealed envelope with the city's public university stamp. Inside, an admission letter to the Faculty of Medicine addressed to Chian Murphy. It was a process she had accompanied her son through for weeks. The letter had arrived that very morning. Siobhan carefully opened the envelope, read the first line, brought her free hand to her mouth, and for the first time in that new life, she cried without restraint, without apologizing to anyone, without having to explain anything. She took out her phone and dialed her son's number. "My love, Mum, it arrived. It arrived!" There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Chian's voice came out firm. "Go on, Mum. When I'm a doctor, I'm going to treat the children of women who clean buildings like yours for free. I promise you, Mum." Siobhan couldn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. "Son, your Granny Roisin is watching you today, and she's smiling." She ended the call. She walked to the office window, looked down at the city, waking up. She took out of her jacket pocket a small old card with already worn handwriting that she had kept since the first night. "So that no child ever again depends on their mother's silence. LMOC." She read it again, put it away, and said aloud, looking at the city, a single phrase to herself and to all who were no longer there. "Mum, Mrs. Mayer, here I am, and I will never be silent again." There are those who believe that the owner of a place is the one who signs the checks, the one who holds the master key, the one who enters the building with an impeccable suit and a cordial greeting. The story of Siobhan Murphy exists to teach us the opposite. The true owner of a place is the one who cares for it when no one is watching, the one who respectfully cleans a lonely old woman's room and treats her like a mother, the old concierge who silently keeps an envelope that doesn't belong to him for 15 years, the housekeeper who dares to speak a name aloud, knowing that name could cost her everything, those who humiliate others, believing that the uniform defines the human being, always forget the same thing. Sometimes, the person who knows most about the place, one believes they command, is the person one never asked anything. And when that person finally decides to speak, they don't need to raise their voice. They just need a phone call in the middle of a corridor, and an entire world, without knowing why, lowers its guard to listen.